Part 14. The Perps. The weekend proved to be a testing time for both Miles and James. John was a very lively individual. He played racquetball on both days, lunched with friends and associates, and visited a nightclub on both nights, once with Denise and the other time without her. He stayed with Denise on both nights. Miles took over surveillance until 6 p.m. each afternoon as James kept up the pretense that everything was normal at work. Miles was shattered, so too was James, whose thoughts of Angela weighed heavily upon his mind.
What the hell's becoming of me? Why do you hide? Tell me the truth. Stolen my heart and broken the rules. Somebody tell her. Everyone tell her I heard. I can make it, I can take it on my own again. I can see her, I can feel her with me everywhere. I can make it, I can take it. She lives inside my head.
The time sitting alone in his car waiting for John to make a move was spent replaying the time he and Angela had been together. When James arrived home, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, he would sit and contemplate their future. Occasionally he would fall asleep, dreaming of what might be, only to awake to the stark reality that Angela had gone.
I'll give you everything you ever dreamed of. Don't tell me no, there's no logical reason. Just talk to me, yeah. Why don't you talk to me, yeah.
He wished he could rid himself of her memory. He wished she would call and tell him they were finished. How could one person totally monopolise another's mind? He talked to Miles about her when they met to change shifts. Miles listened to him sympathetically and offered support. According to Miles, Tate had not had any contact with Angela, and James trusted him. Greg had managed to isolate the software module that was being corrupted when any attempt was made to access that part of the program. He had also managed to find the key access to the module. The password was Angela. They had now managed to disassemble the coding and had worked out how the fraud had been perpetrated, but still had no evidence to prove who was responsible for the crime. James mused that if the police were called in, Angela would be interrogated at some length. After all, the only clues the perpetrators had left behind were her name with access at her terminal. He toyed with the possibility of talking to Frank at Riley's, but decided to give it another week. He would do anything to stop Angela being embroiled into this mess. By Thursday, Miles decided he had an intimate knowledge of the workings of Chevalier's and the stockists of their products. Each day, John would visit another couple of outlets or the warehouse, and Miles would give James an itemised account of John's movements. The weather had been a little inclement, and Miles had lost his beard in a light shower. It was 4 p.m. when John headed out along the highway towards the Chevalier warehousing complex on an industrial park just outside L.A. Same old, thought Miles, as he watched the Porsche pull up outside the main warehouse. Miles rode his bike up a service road that rose above the warehouses, parked the bike, pulled out a thermos and sat down. It was a good vantage point, and one that he had visited previously. As he sipped on his coffee, he thought he recognised a short Latino man talking to John. He squinted and shielded his eyes from the glare with his hand. Still, he found it difficult to identify the man. He pulled out a pair of opera glasses from beneath the saddle of his bike. The magnification was poor, but enough to make out the Latino man. It was the man from the nightclub. It doesn't prove anything, thought Miles. Nevertheless, his pulse was racing by the time the two men got into the Porsche. Mars fired up the bike and slowly drove down the service road, keeping the Porsche in full view until he had descended too far and the Porsche disappeared behind some warehouses. He knew that he would be able to pick up their trail on the other side of the industrial park, so he accelerated to catch them up. Mars reached the other side of the park with plenty of time to spare, but the Porsche was nowhere to be seen. He decided to drive the bike up and down the rows of warehouses to find the car. Eventually, he spotted the vehicle parked up just inside a warehouse 300 yards from Chevalier's main warehouse. He didn't stop. There were 3 men standing by the entrance watching him as he drove by. Unit 42, he noted, and drove back to the service road to get a better view. Unfortunately, he was unable to observe anything from his vantage point, so decided to call James. "They're at Unit 42. I haven't been here before," said Mars with some excitement. "We don't own Unit 42, said James, looking at his list of addresses owned or rented by Chevaliers. "The Latino fellow from the nightclub is with John, and the 3 blokes standing in an entrance keeping an eye on anyone driving past," said Mars. "Wait for me. I'll be with you in 20 minutes, said James. Mars decided to ride around the rear of the unit. When he got close, he parked the bike and walked across to a single door at the back of the building. He tried the handle, and to his amazement it turned, and he opened the door. He crept in and moved quietly into the main warehouse area. He had no idea what he was looking for, but suddenly thought of his mobile. He switched it onto silent ring before putting it in his pocket. The warehouse had 2 floors, each racked from floor to ceiling. The racking was full of brown cardboard boxes. He checked a couple of boxes to see whether they were open. They weren't. "Smells like a lady's boudoir," thought Mars. He could now make out the sound of the men talking, so slipped between some racking and made his way to a point where he could just about hear what was being said. He thought he heard something about 10 o'clock, but found it difficult to be sure. Then he heard something about alarms going on, and the conversation stopped. He moved a little closer, but all he could hear was the sound of the shutters coming down and the bleep, bleep, bleep sound of the alarm system counting down. It was still bleeping when he got to the front of the warehouse as the shutters closed completely. He knew the bleeping would stop shortly and the alarm would be set, so dived into an area close to the front of the warehouse under the cover of racking, where the boxes were only single in height. The bleeping stopped and Mars was alone. He was lying face down on the boxes, barely daring to move. He knew that if he stepped into the walkway on either side of the racking, the alarm would go off and the men would be back. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "James, it's me. I'm inside the warehouse and the bloody alarm's on." "How the hell did you get into there?" asked James. "Through the bloody back door," replied Mars with some urgency. "I'm almost there. I'll be with you in 5. Don't panic," said James. "All I need to know is that those animals have gone, and then I can set the alarms off with complete impunity," said Mars. "Right, I'm in the park right now," replied James. "I'm waiting. Just let me know whether they've gone and I'm out of here," said Mars, trying to find a more comfortable position. "I'm outside. There's nobody here, but don't move," said James. "Why the hell not?" replied Mars. "Because I can't find an alarm box, and that means the alarm is probably linked to their telephones or some other device close to them. Let me check around the back." "Okay, but hurry. I'm dead uncomfortable," said Mars. There was a long silence, and finally James said, "Mars, there's no alarm, and the back door doesn't open." "Fuck!" said Mars. Fuck, and double fuck, I'm fucked." Mars wriggled around on the boxes trying to get comfortable. "They might be back at 10 tonight," said Mars anxiously. "How do you know?" replied James. "I think I heard them say it. How else?" Mars tutted and muttered, "Fool. Hold on a minute. Who's the fool here? Who's the one stuck in a gangster's warehouse waiting for the alarm to go off?" said James. "All right, keep your hair on," said Mars, exasperated at his friend's lack of sympathy for his plight. "I have an idea. Since you're in there, open a box and see what's in it. If you can do that without setting off the alarm, that is," said James, feeling inspired. "And how will I know whether I set the alarm off, since the first thing I know about it will be a bunch of madmen arriving with guns blazing to snuff me out?" said Mars sarcastically. "How do you know they've got guns?" said James, suddenly feeling concerned. "Those types always have guns. I've been to the movies," said Mars, and continued, "Look, I'm going to try and open this box beneath me, and I'll call you back." Mars struggled to open one of the boxes beneath him. Eventually, he managed to drag out a couple of bags. The smell of perfume wafted from the open box. He rang James. "Hi, I've got 2 bags, and they look expensive, and they've got a funny shaped C on the zipper tag. Does your company sell perfume? 'Cause if they do, it's not very pleasant," said Miles. "You've got it. It's Chevalier's merchandise. Don't know much about the perfume, though. I'll ask someone," said James. "Forget the perfume. I'm calling Pat, and he can give me some advice on this situation," said Miles unhappily. Miles called Pat and explained the position, and it wasn't long before some of Riley's boys arrived with Pat himself. After assessing the situation, the men agreed they would involve the LAPD. They decided that since Miles had been locked in accidentally, it would be difficult for anyone to prosecute him. Furthermore, if the goods could be proven to be stolen, they would catch the culprits in one clean sweep. It was decided they would wait till 10. If nobody turned up, Miles would trigger the alarm, and hopefully someone would come. Miles wasn't happy, but consoled himself with the thought there may be a reward, even if it were only a few nice pieces of upmarket accessories for Tate. It was dark in the warehouse, and Miles used the flash on his mobile to look at the contraband. Good quality, he thought, as he unzipped a purse. Shit, he whispered to himself as he pulled a neatly wrapped plastic bag from inside the purse. He phoned James. "Super expensive gear you've got here. I know that bags and purses have stuffing in them to keep their shape, but I've never known coke to be used as stuffing before." "What?" exclaimed James. "You heard me. Bloody drug runners." It was now clear, more than ever, that unless all the gang members were present, some may slip away. The decision was taken at 9 p.m. to set off the alarm intentionally and wait to see who arrived. The reasoning was simple. Some of the gang may be due to arrive at 10 in any case, but there was a possibility that not all the gang members might be present. However, if the alarm was tripped, then the men who were due to arrive would come in any case, but perhaps the top man would come to check things out as well. The wait seemed an eternity for Miles. He made several plans of where he might hide once he tripped the alarm. Each time he found a reason for not using his latest hiding place. He felt sure something would go wrong. At 9, Pat phoned him from James's phone. "Okay, son, we're all set." Miles called off the boxes and lowered himself to the floor. He rose to his feet, but was stiff and limped as the circulation returned to his legs. He shone the flash on his mobile around the warehouse and waved his arms around. There was no sound other than his feet landing on the concrete floor as he jumped up and down. He elected to climb up the steel staircase to the upper level to hide and took up position behind some boxes. It was a full 20 minutes before the first car arrived and 2 men opened the giant shutters at the front of the warehouse. "Is that him?" said Pat to James, as they watched from the cover of another unit. "No, that's not John," said James, concentrating on the 2 men. The 2 men stepped into the warehouse and turned on the lights. One of the men made a call on his mobile. "Shit, Pat, it's only a matter of time before they find Miles," said James anxiously. "The men can't go in till the last moment, till we're sure we have all the perps in one place," said the LAPD captain leading the operation. If time weighed heavily upon James, Miles was beside himself. He wondered why the LAPD hadn't stormed the warehouse, and he could hear footsteps on the steel staircase. Miles was sandwiched between 2 rows of boxes and was becoming uncomfortable. Perspiration ran down his face and his hands were clammy. He felt sure the man would see him. Outside, 2 further cars arrived. One was a gunmetal grey Porsche. John stepped out, but his passenger stayed in the car and 2 men joined him inside the warehouse. The tension in Miles was reaching fever pitch. The man who had climbed upstairs was standing directly in front of the boxes where Miles was hidden. Finally, Miles couldn't take the pressure any more. He didn't care whether he was spoiling the whole operation. He didn't care about anything anymore except about getting out alive. He exploded through the boxes, screaming like a wounded hyena, and fell on top of the man. It's amazing what panic can do to a person, he would later recall. At the same time, the LAPD burst through the warehouse shutters, and hopelessly outnumbered, the gang were cornered and surrendered. Miles was still screaming and punching when he was finally pulled off his man by police officers. "I need a drink," was his only comment. John and his passenger Denise were led away with the other perpetrators. James hugged Miles. "Come on, we'll get the bike tomorrow," he said, smiling. "You're quite a wild man, you know." "What do you think, Pat?" said James as he opened the car door for Miles, who was still recovering from his ordeal. Yeah, he's a real wild one, said Pat, grinning. It was easy, said Miles, partially getting control of his senses and adding, we English are hard but fair. James looked at Pat, who raised his eyebrows and smiled. James said nothing and smiled to himself. The celebrations at Raleigh's went on till the early hours. Miles was a hero, at least in Tate's eyes, and nobody said anything to change that impression. It was after 2, when Raleigh's had quietened down, that James and Miles were able to talk alone. Well, it's all worked out for you, said Miles, looking at James, who was toying with his glass. Yes, I guess it has, said James, but the faraway expression on his face betrayed his true feelings. Don't worry about Angela. She'll be back, and more trouble than ever, said Miles, trying to lift his friend's spirits. You think so? Said James, feeling totally unsure. When have I ever been wrong? Said Miles seriously. You're right. At least you've been right so far, said James, managing a smile.